everyone, welcome to this episode of my wannabe cooking show. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to make a classic homemade pasta. Even if you're somewhat of an inexperienced cook, this is going to be super simple for you to do. It's very fun, and it's going to earn you a lot of cred when you bring it to the dinner table because it is something that is truly of your own design. Okay, really quick before we get started, let's go over our two ingredients. The first one is, of course, flour. You can use any kind you want. I like to use an all-purpose flour. You can also do a whole wheat or a semolina, which is a more traditional durum wheat flour. It's going to give you a really dense, chewy textured pasta, and it holds up super well. Next ingredient is eggs. If you consult the internet, or maybe you have your own little Italian grandmother, chances are they're going to say to use 100 grams of flour per egg. I like to do it a little differently and use 80 grams of flour per egg, and that's because not all eggs are the same size. There's a lot of inconsistencies happening here, so a lot of the times 100 grams of flour per egg just turns out to be a little bit too much. If you do it this way and find that your dough is still too wet, that's okay. There's going to be a lot of extra flouring along the way that's going to substitute, so maybe in the long run it does come out to be 100 grams, but I like to start off with 80. Alright, so let's get started. I'm going to be teaching you how to make this the traditional way, which is the well method. So go ahead and grab yourself a sheet tray. This is going to make your life a lot easier, especially if this is your first time doing it. Alright, so first take your flour and dump it into the middle of your sheet. Take a couple fingers and just start swirling around in the center to make a nice little home for these eggs to sit in. Make sure each part of your well is pretty evenly sized so that we don't have any breakthroughs when we put our eggs in. Crack them directly into it. And if you want to make it easier, crack your eggs in a separate bowl and whisk them in there. It's up to you. Take your fork and start gently breaking these eggs apart and getting them whisked together nicely. A lot of people add salt at this point. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make my pasta water that they get cooked in super salty. Alright, now that we're nice and mixed together, start to slowly pull in the flour from the sides and start getting it mixed in. Very gently. It's okay if your wall breaks, you're just going to have one heck of a mess to clean up. It's going to make it a little bit more difficult. You can use your hand to support as you go along if you see one of the sides get pushed out a little bit. Once our egg mixture starts to thicken up a little bit, go ahead and take some of the flour that's piled up on the sides and flip it in there. At this point you can start getting a little bit more courageous because as you can see, our eggs are not just going to start sliding away from us immediately. Now that we have a pretty good blob, go ahead and just start pushing all the flour into it and cut the flour in with your fork. Now at this point you can totally just go in with your hands and start squishing it around if you want. I personally don't like to have to wash my hands for a very long time. I'm going to keep them out of this as much as possible for now. Okay, now that our dough is a nice shaggy consistency, we're going to start using our hands. I'm going to show you a little tip to help keep your hands a little bit cleaner for this. Just take a little bit of olive oil, drizzle it over there, and slather it around. This is going to help keep the dough from sticking to your hands too much, and it's going to also aid in the moisture level if your dough ends up being a little bit too dry. Just start squeeching it around. When you get these sticky wet bits popping up, use it to pick up all these dry pieces. Alright, now that our dough has come together nicely, I'm going to go ahead and take this away. Those dry bits on here. And you can do this directly on your counter if you want. You can even get another clean sheet tray, that's up to you. I like to use my pastry mat. And now we're going to start the long and arduous process of kneading. Depending on the moisture level of your dough and your technique with doing this, it could take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. Now this whole process could totally be done in your stand mixer. That works, it's a lot less effort. The good thing about doing it by hand is it's pretty much impossible to over knead it doing it this way. When you put it in a stand mixer, you run the risk of the gluten being a little over-processed because of the friction and the natural heat of the motor of the machine. And the method you want to use for kneading is using the heel of your hand and just push down and pull it back. Over and over. And if you find at this point your dough is too sticky, just go ahead and sprinkle some flour on your mat and continue kneading. If you find it's a little bit too dry, you can go ahead and add more oil to your hands. Give it just a tiny little mist of water. Don't add too much of anything at one time. You can always put more in, but you can't ever take it out. Now, as those gluten bonds start to form, this is going to get harder to do. Get up on it, put your back into it. Your shoulders and your forearms are going to thank you. Alright, after some time of kneading, form it into a little ball of sorts. And what we're going to do here is the knuckle press test. You take your knuckle and just press into it. And what you should see is the dough itself pushing back pretty much immediately, and that then almost disappearing. And at this point, it's ready to rest. So to do this, I like to just wrap it in some plastic wrap. You can also do like a damp towel, that works too. Just roll it up in there and leave it on the counter for about 20 minutes to half an hour. Alright, now that our dough is rested, go ahead and place it onto a lightly floured work surface and go ahead and divide it into 2 equal pieces. If you've done double this recipe, go ahead and make it into 4. Any bigger than that is just going to be too long to work with. Whichever piece you're not working with at the time, always keep covered with your plastic. We don't want it to dry out. So if you want, you can go ahead and use a pasta roller like I'm going to do. They're fairly inexpensive, probably like $30 on the web. Or you can roll it by hand with a rolling pin, or as I like to sometimes do, use my trusty wine bottle. So to start, I'm going to form this into kind of a rectangular-ish shape. It makes it easier when you're first forming it through the roller. Go ahead and make sure that each side is nicely floured. And put some on the rollers of your machine too. This is going to help stop any unwanted sticking. Start your roller on the widest setting, which for me is number 1. After you've done your first pass, go ahead and bring it down a notch and send it through again. Now it is recommended that you laminate your dough, and what that's going to do is help the gluten bonds form even better to give you that really nice texture that we're looking for. So go ahead and fold it in half, get a pretty consistent rectangular shape, and feed it back through your machine, again on the widest setting, seam side down. Down a notch again. Now depending on the consistency of your dough, you might want to do this up to 10 times. That's a little egregious in my opinion. My dough has a really nice texture to it, so I'm only going to do it once. Now let's bring it down a notch and start rolling it out. Always go down just 1 notch at a time. If you do it too much, your dough is going to rip. Now as you go along, all that extra flour you've put on your dough is probably going to get reabsorbed. Just give it a light flouring from time to time to make sure that we're not going to get stuck anywhere. Now at this point, if you're still uncomfortable with this whole process and you feel like this one piece of dough is a little bit too long for you to handle, just go ahead and cut it in half here. Make sure you keep your other piece covered. I'm going down to the second to last notch on my roller here. Now what you're looking for here is if you have some texture on your countertop, you want to kind of be able to see that through your dough, or to be able to see your fingers through it, just a little bit. So now that this is all rolled out, just set it to the side to rest, and then repeat with your other one. Now just repeat that same process with your other piece of dough. Okay, now that our dough is all rolled out, what we're gonna do is let it sit and cover it with a clean tea towel or dish towel and let it sit for like 5 to 10 minutes. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna dry it out just a little bit so that when we go and cut it later, it's gonna be a lot easier to work with. All right, now that our dough sheets have rested, we can get to cutting. I'm gonna show you 3 really simple hand cutting techniques that you can do if you don't have yourself a pasta roller. And all it takes is a knife. So the shape of our dough is a little bit oblong, and if you're looking for some even ends, go ahead and just cut off that little rounded bit. Before we roll our dough up, I'm gonna go ahead and give it a little flouring on here. It's gonna end up in a folded, really vulnerable position that's gonna get squished on, so we wanna do this step to ensure that they don't stick together. You can use all-purpose flour again, that's totally fine. I'm going to be using semolina here, and the benefit of using this instead of all-purpose is that it won't get more absorbed into the dough as we're doing this. So to start, give yourself 1.5 to 2 inch width here and just fold it over your fingers. And then again, start from where the other one landed and just keep folding. Doesn't have to be perfect. Don't smush down on it to make sure that it's set, just let gravity do its job. So now we're gonna do pappardelle, this is the first type. And it's probably about 1 inch thick. So just go in and give it a cut. That one's a little bit shorter, but that's fine. Take the ends of your pasta and lift it up, and bam, you have noodles. Make sure they're all an even length. Grab them like this. And take like your first 3 fingers in your palm and just gently wrap them around it. And you have a little pasta nest. Look how cute that is. Flip that one to the side. The next shape that I'm going to show you is a little bit thinner than the first one, and it's a tagliatelle. So go ahead and flour your dough. Roll it up. Give it a little trim. Now take your knife and put it right around the 1/2 inch mark. And again, just cut. Really quick, swift movements. You don't want to press down on it too much. And this is our tagliatelle. And again, give it the little 3-finger roll around. And there is our second kind. This third type is what most people will call a linguini. It's going to be the thinnest of all of them. And this one's thickness is going to be about 1/4 inch. Now for this kind, since there's so many more pieces of noodles, instead of taking each individual one and letting them fall, as satisfying as it might be, just go in and rough them up a little bit. Not too much. They're still delicate, you don't want to squish them. Just help separate them, squish it into a little scrunched bit, and bam! We have 3 different hand-cut pasta types. So now what we're going to do is let them rest yet again for another 5 to 10 minutes. And during this time, we can set our water unspoiled. Okay, I want to make an important note about salting your water here. Don't just salt it. I'm saying salt it, bro. Like the ocean. Your pasta's only going to be sitting here for probably about 3 minutes, and we want to make sure it's salty enough for it to absorb that flavor in such a short amount of time. Okay, so now that our water's boiling, just go ahead and drop in your pasta. Give it a gentle little mix around. And this is not going to stay in here for very long, only about 3 minutes. Obviously you can taste it, and if it's not to your liking, leave it in there for a little bit longer. Okay, now that our pasta's done, let's go ahead and take it out. And I'm just going to put it directly into my bowl here. It has a little knob of butter in it already. And I don't want to get rid of that pasta water completely because that's going to emulsify with the butter and make it nice and creamy. And mix it around. Now if you have a plan to do a sauce for this, go right ahead. I just made homemade pasta, so I don't have time for that. What I'm going to do is throw in some black pepper, some freshly grated Parmesan cheese, and give that a good mix around. It's like a really lazy version of cacio e pepe. And that's it. So thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. If you're cooking along with me, bon appetit!